Thanks everyone for hanging in. We're halfway through day 2, which, as you notice, we started a civilized time of 10 in New Orleans because we know y'all were out last night. But what we got for you now is a really interesting and different panel. We assembled a group of some of the most creative and strategic thinkers around biotech that we know. They do things in different ways. They come from non-traditional backgrounds into this area. They use communications as well as science to advance the field. And so we thought just a really interesting discussion. These people have war stories. If you buy them drinks, you'll probably get more than you might on the panel where they're not mic'd. And they're just some of the smartest and most intuitive and interesting people I know. So we thought, let's throw them all together and see what happens. So this is really, again, a casual dialogue. I'll start off and I'll ask our panel to kind of introduce themselves, where they come from, a bit of their background. I'll toss some questions at them, and then we'll open up for questions from you guys, because we got 4 panelists. We gave it a little extra time, so we have 45 minutes for this one. And let's get rolling. So JoJo, I'll let you kick us off and we'll roll down the line.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm sort of the outlier in this group. I work in neurotech exclusively. So biotech, you guys had some chemistry things on no, not for me. I am a consultant. I do strategic development. So I help people that start in academic labs and help them advance their science, whether that's research with a capital R, research with a little r, it doesn't really matter. I take what they are lacking and partner them with people who can provide that missing piece, whether it's machine learning, chemistry, neuroscience, engineering, mechanical engineering. I work with funders to identify pipeline opportunities, and I have a podcast. And essentially, if it's not engineering or science, then I'm a girl.
All right, David Visi. I'm a lead biotechnologist with the MITRE Corp. And the MITRE Corp is a federally funded research and development center. So in all those letters, FFRDC, we actually work with the federal government to solve problems. So we act as a strategic advisor to the federal government. So basically we cover, I think, everyone except for NSF and DOE. But outside of that, we have relationships with the federal government. And, and it can be ranging from things. So things that I focus on are things like medical countermeasure development or CBRN threats. So chem, biological, radiological, nuclear. But also other areas that we've worked in the past in are things like supply chain. So I'm sure everybody was familiar with the supply chain issues that we have, especially related to healthcare products. So that was one of the other areas that we really explored, kind of identifying key choke points, especially in regards to kind of delivery of medical countermeasures. And yeah, that's kind of what I do currently. I also served in the House of Representatives for a little bit, just I guess speaking of kind of weird backgrounds, as well as in the private sector, working on kind of tech commercialization with kind of small biotech. I'll stop there.
Hi, I'm Chris Conley, and I own my own consulting firm called DNA Consulting. I started as a headhunter recruiter in biotech life sciences. Still do it today, actually. What I do, which is a little bit unique, is I work with startup companies and I help them build out their executive leadership teams, their boards, but I also help connect them into funding and finance. I don't raise money for them, but I know enough people by just over the years, 23, I think, and counting, of bringing people together and connecting people. I'm a natural connector, and so that's what I do. So when I step into a startup company to help work with them, oftentimes you wear multiple hats. I'm also, and just recently accepted an exciting position, chief of staff with Inkilt. So I'm having a lot of fun.
There you go.
Just figure all these things are on.
And you run a podcast, right?
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't turn my microphones off hardly ever. So I'm Don Davis. I am the president and principal for 5280 Life Sciences Consulting. We primarily help with business level operations inside of life science companies. So oftentimes, building out the leadership infrastructure, as well as, helping execute key projects for a lot of life science organizations that are small to mid-size. So in addition to that, I have a podcast titled Life Science Success. So for anybody that has a small to mid-sized company here that you want to be on a podcast and kind of get the word out, Life Science Success is a great way to do it. And you can visit the website lifesciencesuccess.com and register there as a guest.
Great. Well, now that we've gotten our introductions, let me start and dig in with some questions. So Chris, I'll start with you if I can. We've known each other for a while now. My last trip before the pandemic, I met Chris and led to 5 million interactions and lots of Zoom calls during the pandemic because we hit it off. And so we talk about things all the time and new twists. And one of our conversations is how we kind of wound up with this as a topic at Bio in the Bayou. Now, you've been one of the most innovative people in this field, and you come from recruiting into more overall strategy now, layering that in. So what do you think of when we say strategy and creativity is needed in biotech more than ever before?
It definitely is, especially the creativity. I mean, it's changed so much. And I think coming at it from a lot of different angles is how we're going to actually solve some of these diseases, ideally cancer to start with. You have to look at it from a lot of different angles. And again, there are trends right now with AI and then data, because data is king. And then also blending them together to figure out what's going on and how do you do it? And where do you find it? Even, with the convergence of biology and tech and some of the different changes that are taking place too, now it's becoming a real thing, especially AI with pharma, and it's their buzzword. But I still don't think that they really get what that means. And everybody has a default to kind of tend to fall back on it again as to what they know and what they think they know. You need to come at it with a lot of different ways. And even in funding, definitely. Funding, as we definitely know, you have to get creative. So I think it's changing.
Interesting. And so kind of jumping from that, Don, you mentioned your podcast, but you've also done a book. And I know you've applied creative strategy in different ways, often through the lens of communication. Can you give us the one key thing you've learned from all these people you've interviewed in your podcast who are all brilliant? I say that self-servingly, having been on it. But as was our executive resident, Elaine Hams, obviously he gets the best people. But what's one of the main things you've learned from doing this? Because you've talked to people in all fields, all divisions, coming in from all areas. Give us some knowledge.
So as you know, after being on the podcast, right, I try and draw out those elements of the story. One of the things that, and this happened to me very early on, just as I was starting out as a consultant. One of the people that sent me a pitch deck of theirs had so much science in it, you couldn't understand the story. So what are you trying to cure? What is it that you're going after? What is the story? Is much more important for an overall audience. And it's important to your investors. It's important in general, just across the industry. But that's what I would say overall is taking the elements and gems that people have and building that story is absolutely critical.
Oh, very nice. And so JoJo, you've also used communications media, and you also have a podcast that is really popular. It's one of the most popular at the intersection of neuro and tech. And you've interviewed a ton of people in that space. But I've also been fortunate to be at a lot of seminars you put on, courses, and watched you work a room where you're often the person saying, have you thought of this? And asking a question and trying to get folks to look at things in that different way. So what are some of the tools that you use to drive those conversations and turn that creative spark on and make it happen?
Dominoes. So but it's a strange story, but my husband grew up playing country club dominoes after golf, and it was like a thing, and it's really competitive. And there are all these strategic moves that, if I have boxcars, the next play is going to be the 6-4. And there's all this strategy that's already prescribed when you sit down and play tiles. So he taught me how to play. I'm like, well, yeah, but I don't want to play that way. I want to play my way. And he gets so frustrated because that's the only way I can beat him, because I don't think the same way he does. I don't think the way that you're supposed to. I think things absolutely bass backwards. And that's sometimes I'm not a scientist and I'm not an engineer. I work with them all the time. And so I'm afforded the opportunity to look, ask dumb questions, but help them arrive at an answer that I think that they are going to be happy with in the end, because I see things differently than they do.
It's a great way I've never heard your domino story. That's fantastic. And so, David, you explore this from a different lens where you're part of MITRE. And that's, as you talk about, it's an entity that really exists to serve the public interest. And as being that independent advisor and among many other things, creating connections between folks in the health and biotech area as far as what your space is. And so what does a creative collision in this space look like to you? And how does MITRE help those occur? And how can people access the tools you have?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's really engaging in things like this. So I think probably a lot of people aren't very familiar with what MITRE does. I think they've likely done that on purpose, but kind of a recent initiative to really start getting out into the community a little bit more and talking about what MITRE does and also how we can potentially collaborate. So I think that was the original reason that I actually started speaking with James. Was Elaine connected me and kind of was curious about what MITRE does. But I think it's initially just engagements like this and kind of seeing where those potential relationships can go. I know one of the areas that's of key interest to MITRE that we think is going to be kind of looking at it from like the horizon strategies and things like that, kind of what's coming down the pipeline. And synthetic biology is a constantly huge issue. I think if you ask everybody in the room, everyone's going to have a different definition of what that means. But I mean, that's one of the areas that we see is that we really need to build our expertise in. And kind of some of the ways that we're doing that is through engagements and say like regional groups, like much like Bio and the Bayou, I think. And so we do similar things with groups up kind of in the area that was close to us. So Northern Virginia, we have engagements with UVA. We support kind of student-led synthetic biology teams through support of, I believe it's called iGEMS. But yeah, I mean, it really is somewhat of an organic approach right now, just because I think we're also figuring out what those engagements looks like. But I think in the more traditional sense of how we engage with universities is that, I might have some technical expertise within an area, but we're not the ones actually doing the work on the ground. So we, a lot of times, will reach out to experts, so professors at universities, and they're the ones that we have to rely on. Be like, well, these are the technical experts in the field. Because again, we have to rely kind of on, people in this room and things like that to actually help us solve problems and, provide, I guess, like just support to our conclusions, right? And saying, yes, this is correct, this is wrong. But yeah.
It sounds almost like you maybe can perform the role of what Elaine does for us, or almost an executive in residence, not in residence, but people can call you and kind of get those bits and pieces and work through your program.
Yeah. And I think the other part is like, so MITRE does have a very good understanding of kind of federal priorities, right? Like that's kind of what we do is at times we participate in that process, but also just having an understanding of like what's happening in the ecosystem, kind of both on the private and academic sector, but also what the federal government is interested in, and making those connections between the two.
All right. So now we've heard from all of you about what you think the opportunities are and some of the strategies and creative things you use. This is out for everyone. So what are the biggest roadblocks you see that people can't overcome or struggle to overcome to be creative and to actually think outside of the box they're in? Because often for scientists, engineers, they're trained in a specific field, and you go deep in one area, and it's harder to step outside of that sometimes. But what are the barriers you see every day in working with folks? JoJo, go ahead. It seems like you're ready to go.
Oh yeah, it's academia. I think the traditional model of publish or perish needs to be reevaluated. And if you're on a tenure track, you shouldn't be penalized for taking a leave and doing a startup. You should be rewarded for that. There should be recognition for non-traditional accomplishments in research and science. And the other thing, I brought a whole engineering institute into a molecular biology shop and retraining them that patents are as important as publications was a tough sell. And they still struggle with that when they do their annual evaluations is, well, you have 11 patents, but only one paper. And so you're not going to move forward. And that's unfair in today's climate.
Especially when you see so much of a push on economic development as part of your job in academia.
And you're taking NIH money or public money to do your research, and there should be some return to the public. And that comes now in the form of commercialization and getting into patient care.
Yeah, well stated. David, you want to follow that up? No, No pressure.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny is I actually gave, I did a career talk yesterday at the Tulane medical school. But I think kind of, and this is one of the things I always bring up, like, I think some things that maybe we're like not so good at, like, but building out your network. And I know, I mean, sometimes it sounds like a bit swarmy, I think how some people think, but I mean, that's how I met Elaine and that's how I met James. And then that's why I'm in this room today. But I mean, that's how you kind of build out, like, if you don't have an expertise, I don't know, like in clinical trials or something like that. A lot of times it's like just asking somebody and then building that relationship with them and then kind of goes from there. And I feels like I just started doing this yesterday, even though it's been 7 or 8 years now, but kind of, I quickly realized it's like that I've built out these people that I can rely on and like ask questions to. Because it is sometimes, I think one of the speakers yesterday was like, oh, I can just pick up the call and call somebody that does this and then get an answer within 10 minutes. And a lot of times, I mean, I can do the same thing that it's like, or I can know somebody at NIH and ask a quick question about something. But I think that's kind of one of the aspects that I think is incredibly important is, you know, just again, as academics, like initially it's like, maybe we're kind of solely focused on kind of what we're working on, but I think getting that different perspective from like different areas of expertise, but also even I think on the development side, kind of having those that network in like regulatory, and then I mean, yeah.
So I'm going to ask the audience a question. How many of you have LinkedIn? All right, good. How many of you are going to make a plan to drop each of these people a note and say, hey, I enjoyed your panel. I'd love to connect. Most people don't do that, and always include the note because remember, you know them. They didn't know you. And if it's random, I don't know where I know them from. Just drop a note and say that. It's a great way to build your network because LinkedIn is more and more a place where you see people across your feed, they post something, and my network has grown exponentially just from commenting on something. And someone said, hey, let's jump on a Zoom, which post-pandemic, people do more and more where pre you had to meet in person. Chris, your thoughts on this?
Collaborations and partnering, definitely. I think that is something that's so important. California does a really good job. The universities actually work together and you can go after bigger grants. You can do so much more. You can actually bring on pharmaceutical companies to partner with, to collaborate with, or even to help do drug development, and work with you. And it also is a way to raise money. I mean, there's just so much that is really left that's not misunderstood. For instance, like in Boston, I wouldn't want to even try to partner with anybody or one university with the other. California is different. Berkeley, UCF, Stanford, they're all partnering together, and not just on grants either. I mean, they'll work on projects together, and that's actually where like some of the AI and machine learning and data is coming from when they're partnering with one of the universities and working on some of their drug development and even patient recruitment. So
it sounds like the problem is silos and that there aren't many regions where the people do partner and work together. And that's, I think, something we're proud of here is that we have this kind of stuff. Patrick and I just had a meeting. Kenesha from Xavier University of Louisiana is working with us. We had a meeting with a company who's here from Bio on the Bayou about doing the exact thing you're talking about here in New Orleans. And I think the reason we're getting those kinds of meetings is exactly what you said, that we all sit in a room and talk together and take meetings together. John, take us home.
So I'm going to go back to one point that you made a minute ago in terms of your network first, because so when I worked for GE Healthcare for 18 years, while I was there, I had a LinkedIn network of about 1,000 people. Whenever I left, I figured everybody inside of GE had a network of probably the same. I mean, you're constantly meeting people. Why not link with them as well? And then that way, you kind of know who they are and they know you as well. And what's funny to me is to hear how many people don't spend time, one, building their network, two, spending time building relationships. I mean, there's so much that happens inside of life sciences that is important with regards to the relationships that we build. So that's where I would start. And the secondary part is that I think you can only get so much out of your education. So to JoJo's earlier point, I feel like the number one thing that a lot of life science companies really need is to figure out both how to be creative and innovative along with running a business, which is not an easy thing. You talk about walking and chewing gum, right? I mean, it's that whole, thing altogether is a difficult thing to pull off. And it takes somebody really balanced that can go from I'm innovating now, I'm executing tactical, elements right now, And then I have to think about the strategy and where my company's got to go. So all of those things aren't necessarily easy to keep in balance. And so that's where I mean, I really think that it's smart to suggest that, you know, stepping out and, you know, going out and running a startup is a great, you know, great suggestion.
And going to happy hour and mingling and trading cards.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, so
well-
4 to 5 today.
So the only thing I would encourage people not to do, right, is don't just skim the surface and like try. It's not a numbers game. So the goal is not like the number of connections, but how many real people do you know? Because I mean, the first thing that most people that I reach out to and I say, you know, hey, I'd like to connect with you. The very next follow-up message that I send them is I'd like to hop on a Zoom with you. because I want to know more. And there's so many suspicious people now that I'm a consultant, they come back and say, well, you want to sell me something? No, I have a podcast. I have a lot of things I can offer you that don't cost you a dime other than, you know, just knowing me. And yeah, so I think LinkedIn connections in depth are important.
Right. So audience questions, fire away. Yeah.
Actually, not a question. It's more to go beyond what you're saying about the networking approach. LinkedIn is a fantastic platform. It has its limitation, but we have a group that we are some of the people here. We're part of a network that we created through the pandemic. And
It's called the pajama party.
it's called- And what is incredible is that the amount of things that I get every week when we talk. Sometimes there are 30 people, sometimes we have 2 or 3. There's no agenda, but every time either it's a good therapy because like you discuss with people that you know about your issues or your question, whatever. But more importantly, we started to know more about each other, and we ended up like literally leveraging things in a way that was really multidimensional. And I think for me, it's about repositioning people at the center of what we're doing. What it is to do business, it's about the people. If we do business without the people, we're wasting our time and we're doing something wrong.
Well, when you talk to investors, they say they look at the team first, science second. Are there still investors in the room? Yeah, probably. Yeah. Rob, give me a thumbs up. Yes.
Team first, team second, team third, then science.
Oh, from JoJo. Yeah. Rob, you have a question or no? Other yeah. Luke.
I wanted to follow up on JoJo's patents versus publications issue. For those of us who work in academia, but maybe on the advancement side or the business development side, trying to move the institutions along in that direction, being more open. Can you point to any universities that you're aware of that do that well?
So the question was, just so we have it for the video and Ian doesn't yell at me, is can JoJo point to universities that actually do the patents versus publications and balance that well?
I don't know in terms of career advancement for individual PIs, if people are doing that well. Excuse me, if you're asking what universities are proactive in their tech transfer outreach, Tulane, absolutely. I think you guys do an excellent job of understanding where the needs are outside of your school and then bringing people in as they fit or where you bring them value or vice versa. And I think that's one thing I'd say about LinkedIn is reach out for value, not for metrics. But I can't think of if I understood your question correctly. I don't know that anybody's doing a good job yet. I know Rice University, we're looking at some innovative ways to reward commercialization efforts, entrepreneurship. Cleveland, Case Western does a good job. We do a workshop on entrepreneurship there, and it's happening, but I think it's going to be a slow change.
It sounds like it's happening not on the coast, which is nice.
I was actually going to jump in because that was going to be another pet peeve of mine and I see it. We had a massive grant. It was like 5 R01s rolled up into one. We scored the highest and we didn't get funded because we're not on the coast.
Did I see a hand over this way? Yeah, go ahead. Hold up. Over here. Please.
I just want to mention about the patent applications and promotions and stuff that was before. for example, in LSU, they do something good, but not completely. I mean, a patent application is considered as a single publication, but a patent application with the process associated with it probably requires a lot longer time than a single application, single publication. So there is some effort by institutions to do recognize a patent as a publication, but it's just a single number. It doesn't have weight over other publications.
Yeah, so the comment was that some institutions are looking at recognizing patents as a publication, but often patents require basically the work that would go into several publications or have enough science to be in several publications, and that balance has to be worked out more effectively than perhaps it is.
An H index and an impact factor for patents.
Oh, interesting. I wonder if this panel could take that on.
I was also going to add on to Dr. Galaris's comment. We helped get that into the P&T considerations, but I don't know that they're actually, like you said, like it carries any weight whatsoever. So it's in there and it says, you know, your startup activities, your patents, patent applications, but it doesn't carry any weight.
So we have to do more than lip service in that area somehow. Okay, any other questions? Yeah. So first and then second.
I want to ask the panel, what about junior people that do not have yet a network? Any advice for those? And then a shout out to Nucleate for those who don't know. It's a grad school, nonprofit grad students organization bringing entrepreneurship in.
So the question is, how do junior people build their network? And also a shout out to Nucleate, a program that they can access to help them do so. So thoughts for how they build their network as younger, more junior people?
Absolutely. It's so incredibly important to build your networks. I mean, for instance, if you were to link with me on LinkedIn, I have close to 12,000.
That's how you build your network right there,
Okay,
Chris
right there.
Conley.
That's that came from recruiting, because every single position that I ever worked on, I don't care which one it is, regulatory, whether it's, you know, C-suite, your boards, when you link with them, you have access to everybody that they know as well. And I mean, I've been doing this for so long. I mean, I have some pretty amazing connections, really. And so you get to know them because you've worked with them and early on and you followed them through their career. So it's a great way to kind of jumpstart. And, you know, and then you can reach out and ask for favors if you need to, or if they need help, or, you know, again, it's give and take. So that's how you really, I think, start to build your relationships and your network. And then also going to other events like JP Morgan, Bio, and then the cocktail receptions is really where you meet the most people. And it's awesome. I mean, it truly is. And so you build it organically there as well.
And if you're in science, I'll toss one thing in off that, what Chris said. Those are often more expensive conferences, but if you talk to your tech transfer, your business development, whatever your group is, sometimes we have funds for those, or we can go to the provost or somebody and say, look, we want to take somebody. We might be able to find a way to help get you there. And if you have your BD person with you, your tech transfer person, your innovation person, they can set up the meetings for you and do the follow-up. That's what we're here for. And we love that. We love having a scientist with us because it makes our job so much easier because we don't have to talk about your science. Then you're there to do that.
Oh, and I just want to add
Yeah,
one more
please.
thing to it, James Levitt. So, I mean, I feel like I was a junior person not that long ago. I feel like maybe I'm at mid-career. But I think especially kind of talking to, you know, some of the kind of grad students in the audience and I think also like cold emails were something that actually worked quite effective for me when I was just trying to build out the network. And I mean, you know, not everyone responds, but I would say, right, like I think 80 or 90% of the people actually responded. And sometimes there were pretty high up people, like one kind of a colleague of mine at one point, he was like the director of BARDA, which is a funding authority in the federal government. And there was some connection that I had that I could be like, oh, well, we did this together and then you were this. But then he responded and it was somebody that 3 or 4 years later ended up getting me a job somewhere. And I think sometimes it's little things like that. And also just one other thing where I think it's like building, I guess, meaningful long-term like relationships with these people. You know, sometimes it's not gonna, you know, might be you connect with somebody and then you might not talk to them for a long time or it just kind of falls off. But then other times, and I'll just give another example of like these random occurrences that happens at conferences is that's how I met Elaine. Is, you know, I was with my boss and she was like, well, I guess we should split up and network. And so we split up during lunch and then Elaine sat next to me and and we talked, and then here we are 7 or 8 years later. And we've collaborated on multiple things, including kind of working with companies that she had started up. And then, now I'm here today. So I would say you just never know when those opportunities occur until like it's after the fact and you're, looking back. But, you can really build those meaningful connections over time. And, it's important just sometimes just randomly walk up to people and be like, hey, how's it going?
And
What
a
do
lot
you
of
do?
folks coming out of science, that's hard for because in general, scientists are introverts. Believe it or not, I'm actually an introvert. I recharge in quiet. I know it's hard to believe, but they're like, haha, no, seriously. But like Elaine and I have a deal because I'm less of an introvert than Elaine. She has to meet 5 new people before we can leave a reception. And she'll come up to me and say, I met 5, like, how many were new? She's like, 3. I'm like, 2 more, then we can go.
I didn't see 2 of them. Show me again. Show me your work.
She's like, okay, I do have my 5. We're leaving now. We're not staying till 11. So we have a good work spouse relationship. Lily, did I see your hand up?
Yeah, I wanted to make a pitch for something, which
Yeah.
is Innovation Core program. iCore, which is really fantastic at the customer discovery piece is really informative and a great teaching tool for investigators of getting out of the lab, literal lab, right, and asking questions and building their network. And what we find after running cohorts is that people approach their science in a different way because they're more apt to go ask an opinion as opposed to being more insular and thinking, well, this is it, I've invented the best thing ever, everyone's gonna want it, instead of like talking to your network and expanding your network. So I think that program is great. I don't know how accessible it is, but I think it's really built exactly for scientists of like, here's your hypothesis, go out there and see if you can get some data to support it or not.
So we had Lily Portilla of the NIH NCATS talk about the iCore program and how important that is and how she's seen the transformation in scientists who have gone through that because they learn to ask questions versus just going out and diving into their conclusion and actually getting information that can help them guide their process. And David, I don't know, can you talk about iCore a little bit? Do you guys refer folks to that?
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely referred folks to the iCore program, but I think like just like jumping off that to like similar things to that, especially when we're thinking about like alternative ways of thinking about problems. There's opportunities, especially I think pretty much anybody in this room can apply for it's called a AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowship. And it actually gives you an opportunity to work for a year in a federal agency, or I got to do it for a member in the House of Representatives. But it's kind of bringing that your science background and then bringing it to a federal agency. A lot of them, of course, end up at NIH. And I mean, one of the things that I recommend, like it'll be like a typically like a year-long sabbatical. You can do it for 2 years too, but it gives you that opportunity to really kind of learn the nuts and bolts of like what's happening. Because I think a lot of times there's a tendency of just looking at when that RFP comes out and then you read it, but that is a 3 or 4 year long process of identifying that. And even like the topics of interest from say like NIAID, there are committees that put out those ideas that for the next 2-3 fiscal years ahead. So what's kind of coming down the pipeline. But I think that's another kind of interesting way of like thinking a little bit outside of the box in terms of learning how these federal funding agencies work, because I know a lot of people there are heavily reliant on getting those grants. I think working there gets you a better understanding of just kind of that inside baseball of how it works. And if you don't have a year, I know they used to have this, and I'm old, so this was a minute ago, but they used to have a week-long compressed program with the AAA. Yeah, they still have that. I'll tell you, it is one of the most illuminating things I've been to, because what he said they do for a year with younger folks, if you're a little older or don't have time, they compress it to like 7 nonstop days, but it is really, really cool. And you come out knowing stuff that you had no idea. And some of it's a little scary because they teach you how Congress operates, and it's really, really, really sad.
We love that program, and we love people who are on the bench who want to make a transition into the science policy or commercialization. We hire AAAS fellows all the time, and they go lead.
So if you want a job from Lily, or if you want to get funding from her, go through the program. Please go ahead.
I'd like to add one more thing that probably most people don't know. In RSA fellowships, most of the people think that these fellowships are for postdocs and students, but actually I used to be involved in this for a private sector many years, long time ago. But we get only one application in probably in 2 years, where a faculty, an established faculty, wants to go somewhere to learn new things. And this fellowships, and NRSA fellowship, you can get paid for the whole salary will be paid, you get some money for research, and you go to a different institution as long as it's within the States. Very easy to get. Success rate is very, very high. And people can take advantage of it.
So it's a good comment on fellowship opportunities and looking at those at other institutions as ways to kind of increase your knowledge, increase your network. Because when you go somewhere else, you're out of your bubble and your pond, and you're meeting people who then know other people. And it's a great way, even if it's for a short time, to learn and expand. And industry will do this as well with academic scientists, where you can go spend a week or two and they'll come in and spend a week or two. And these are the kinds of things creative institutions are looking at doing. So Don, before we let you get away from some of your stuff, we referenced your book earlier, and I had to write down the title, but it's called Overcommitted: How to Transform Your Habits and Achieve the Life You Desire, which we're probably all overcommitted in this room, so we could probably all learn something from it. So I asked Don in advance, I said, I want him, because you got to buy his book to get everything, but give us one bit of knowledge from that you think can help everyone here balance their lives better.
Yeah. So, well, first of all, buy the book.
It's all in the book, right?
It is
Available
all
in
in
print and
all in the
digital
book,
version, right? Yeah.
available in bookstores everywhere. Yeah. Right. So the first thing is that so many times we wind up overcommitted because we're sort of in a position of always saying yes to many things that are in our life and just not sort of correcting or righting the ship. And so, through the book, I kind of walk people through how to think about delegating things that are currently, in your world that honestly you shouldn't have responsibility for, how to more or less, automate things, how to really, work through, executing a plan to try and get some of these heavy overcommitments off of yourself. And so, and this came from, by the way, coaching clients in life sciences.
Mhm.
So, there's just were so many people that would show up and just essentially say, hey, look, I have all these family commitments. I have all these other things that I'm trying to do, and I just don't have enough time. And that's exactly where the, sort of the idea of the book, more or less came from.
Nice. So there's something you could apply and buy the book to learn more, or buy him a drink at $4, which will cost you nothing to get more information.
Right. Yeah.
All right. So Chris and JoJo, I want to turn back to y'all because you've made careers out of seeing interdisciplinary connections in science. Although neither one of you has a traditional background people would think of for this. Like Chris, you come from business, if I remember right, and JoJo, you come from communications. What drew you to science? Like, most people don't wind up in science from those fields. What drew you in and what keeps you there?
Revenge.
So the
Seriously.
red hair is real.
My horns aren't showing today. I just
Can you elaborate on that?
yeah, absolutely. I grew up, I went to 14 fantastic schools. I went to a fantastic school, but I was not the science or math kid. And my teachers didn't contradict that because I'm just not. So now when I go to conferences and I'm on a panel or moderating a talk with rock star scientists, I always get a photo and send it back to my biology teacher. Say, see, I literally fell backwards into this and it's so exciting and so much fun that I can't walk away. I just had a 2-week vacation and my husband's like, well, you worked every day. And I said, no, I did my hobby every day. My work is still at the office and I still have to go do that. But the things that I did because I love doing them. Snorkel. Yes. Connect people. Yes. I can do both. So that's what keeps me
And
here.
with a waterproof phone at the same time.
I know.
Chris, what about you?
Gosh, so I was actually recruited to be a recruiter and I started in IT. That's what it used to be called, as IT. Now it's AI, machine learning. And seriously, and I moved to Seattle to actually take a position at a company called Cyber. And one of my colleagues actually went over to a new company called MITRE. It wasn't actually new. They were actually in the process of getting MBRL approved. And then Amgen came in and swooped them up. Anyhow, so my friend was actually working in their HR group and asked me to help. And boy, once I started working on it, I got bit hard. And I've stayed in it ever since. I moved from IT immediately because there's no passion there for me. Sorry, there just isn't. But, trying to find a cure. And it really was in immunology, which is, rheumatology is the first indication for Humira and Embro, which I worked on both and launched. But it was also in oncology. And that was really where I found my passion.
All right, so David and Don, I got a question for the two of you. You both come from different areas as well. 5280 Life Science Consulting and MITRE. And how should those in the room, so either folks in academia or startup companies, think of you in terms of accessing you and working with you? Like, what's the best way to utilize you as an asset for them?
I guess I'll start. Yeah, I mean, sending me an email, give me a call. I have a bunch of cards that I need to give out. But yeah, I think just like real, I think because again, like even like I've been at MITRE for it's been about 2 years now, and I'm still like learning about what MITRE does and kind of all the areas that it works in. And again, like I think it's just kind of reaching out to me because I do have some, a background in drug development, medical countermeasure. Oh my gosh, medical countermeasure development. As well as MCM, would say MCM. But yeah, I think it's really just kind of like, shooting me a message and kind of talking where we can work together. Because again, I mean, I think even with kind of how we started talking, James, like we're trying to figure out maybe like how maybe Tulane and MITRE can work together. And it'll likely be kind of a little bit more organically. We threw out a couple of ideas, but I think of right now, just kind of exploring what the possibilities are there.
John.
Yeah, for me, I mean, I would say as well, it's connecting and, sort of working through what your potential needs are. I've had people call me and say, hey, look, our current CMO can't, execute, the way that we need them to. You know somebody? Well, it just so happens to be that I do and, I'm able to leverage my network and help people all the time. And so, I'd much rather, sort of start a relationship off with, how can I help you? And base it off of that.
All right, so we have 3 minutes left. I'm going to ask y'all one final question. And Don, we'll start with you and roll backwards down the line and with JoJo, because we know that's going to be great. So each of you work in different ways. Several of you are consulting or an agency that helps people. And so you work with people, whether you call them collaborators or partners or clients. There's probably either something you think of that makes the best client or something you think of that makes the worst, like that trait that either is a plus or a minus. Give us that thing, or the best and the worst. Like, what are the things you look for and what makes you say, no, you're fired as a client or a partner?
Well, so, I mean, one of the things that, I definitely love executives that are very collaborative, just overall. And you can kind of see it in the way that they interact with people and the way that they, they just don't take what's on their mind. They're continually, trying to think about how do I pull my team into this decision rather than making the decision by myself. I also cover oftentimes with clients though too, and a lot of people would know this as well if you've been in life science startups for a while. They're oftentimes bad-tempered, bad actors that move from startup to startup, and so you kind of see this sort of bad attitude kind of migrate over time because they're able to be somewhat successful. And what I oftentimes tell my clients is, look, you guys can have disagreements and, undress somebody that's, up presenting or, yell and scream at your team when I'm not here. But when I am here, I don't want to be any part of it. I just don't want to be a part of that. And I do have a termination clause in my contract that allows me to essentially terminate without cause.
Interesting.
So,
Chris.
Oh, great question. I have to believe in what you're doing. And I may not necessarily love what you're doing with the science, but still I have to believe in it, because part of what I do is I sell you. I'm your ambassador. I'm out there talking to everybody, and I can also connect you to everybody in my network as well. But I have to really believe. And even though right now I'm dealing with one CEO who I just want to strangle, I really do on a daily basis. And he's just getting in his own way constantly. But I like him well enough that he's still alive. So
David.
I think clearly communicating like key decision points and like kind of making the decision, because there's a lot of tendency like especially with scientists that we're kind of waffle on things. We add a bunch of caveats, but I think definitely like having like a, almost like coming down to a yes, no kind of decision point. and very clearly kind of providing the data up front and then being like, what's the answer? I think that's usually a very good sign if somebody does that. But yeah, that's the immediate thing that I can think of.
All right, JoJo, take us home.
All the things, and then respect for yourself, respect for your team, respect for the work that people do, and respect for people's time. Just don't be an asshole.
Number one.
All right, thank you guys. Y'all were awesome.
Right. Thank you.
Bill, what up?